Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and today's Tactica video is going to cover the Doomsday Ark for Codex Necrons. This one's fairly topical at the moment because it received a recent points reduction from Chapter Approved, so without further ado, let's get into it. Looking at the stat line, it's got a healthy movement of 12 inches, it's got a weapon skill 6, which is pretty standard for vehicles, very poor, 3+ ballistic skill, which is pretty good. It's what you expect when you want to hit consistently. So it's the standard, it's the benchmark. Strength 6, toughness 6, bit low on the toughness, but there is a rule which I'll go over which will cover that. Wounds 14, very generous. 3 attacks, which is standard for a vehicle. 10 leadership, which is relevant in some aspects, but for the most part not. And a 3+ save, which is not too bad, especially when you combine it with some of its other survivable attributes. Obviously it has a degrading profile, so when it's 4 to 7 wounds remaining, it has a movement of 8. Goes down to a movement of 4 when it's 1 to 3 wounds remaining. Its ballistic skill suffers, going down from a 4 to a 5 incrementally. And its attack suffers, which is it's neither here nor there because it's unlikely to be doing anything in close combat. So immediately off the bat, we can see it's a fairly fast moving vehicle and it's quite survivable in its wounds total. And it's pretty consistent with its attack. It's able to hit on a 3+. So it's obviously going to be a reasonable stat line to start with. Toughness 6 would be low, except it does have a little benefit later on in quantum shielding. We'll go over that then. So what are the weapons this vehicle has? Well, its namesake, Doomsday Cannon, which is where it derives its name, is its primary weapon system, and it also has a Gauss flare array times by 2. So going over the Doomsday Cannon, it has 2 modes, low power and high power. Starting with the low power, it's range 36, heavy D6, strength 8, -2 AP, and D3 damage. It is also a blast weapon. Off the bat, this doesn't look like a particularly powerful weapon system. It's okay. It's not particularly great, it's very average. I mean, strength 8 is a nice wounding on a 3+. It's only got -2 AP, so vehicles will generally get a 5+ save against it if you're firing it at those sort of targets. Heavy D6, it's fairly unreliable. It's an okay weapon system if you have to move and still fire. Where the weapon system starts to get a bit more powerful is range of 72, which depending on your terrain and the placement of the board can be useful. It's heavy D6 as well, which again is very swingy. You either roll well or you don't at all. Strength 10, which is great. We like strength 10 because it's wounding just about everything on a 3+ at least. It's going to be obviously wounding toughness 5 targets on a 2+, and we have a few of them with Gravis armor and Space Marine armies. It's -5 AP, which is very good against vehicles and that don't have an invulnerable save, of course. It means that most vehicles are not going to get any form of save when they're hit by this thing. And it does D6 damage per wounding shot. Now, the abilities on this high power version of the weapon, it has blast as common with the previous weapon, so it can do a few extra shots against a large target. Means it's going to wound orcs on a 2+, just bear that in mind. But also, the bearer can only make attacks with the profile, the high profile, if it remains stationary in its previous movement phase. This basically means that this is an artillery platform. It's going to be sat there trying to get the best out of its performance using strength 10. And if you're not really able to get that, you're better off with a different weapon system. It's too swingy otherwise. You want to be firing this as many turns as possible to take advantage of the fact that heavy D6 and damage D6 are pretty luck dependent. And if you only get 2 or 3 shots off, you can't expect them all to hit and all to wound. And potentially invulnerable saves are going to kick in and some of them might save it. You're not necessarily going to do enough damage with the D6 damage. It's not consistent enough, so you want to be firing every turn on high power. So in turn, this means that the Doomsday Ark is largely going to be a stationary target. It's going to just sit there in a good fire lane and just blast away each turn. Hence why its weapon skill is going to be pointless and it's generally going to be fairly protected. If it does have to move, it has got movement of 12, so you will limit the amount of time wasted moving, and that's not too shabby. But overall, you want to move as little as possible with this, so bear that in mind when you deploy it. Now, defensively, but it actually becomes fairly offensive just for the amount of shots you have, it also has a Gauss flare array. There's 2 of these, and each one is rapid fire 5, strength 4, -1 AP, just like the Gauss flare for Necron warriors. This means that it can put down 20 shots, the equivalent of a squad of Necron warriors on a target that is up close against them. And if you're further away, it's still going to put out 10 shots a turn, which is, not rapid fire, but still pretty good. It's a nice supplemental weapon. You wouldn't take it just for this weapon, but it's far from vulnerable to infantry because of it. So it's nice to be able to blast away with the Gauss flare array whilst you're blasting something larger or more important with the high-powered Doomsday Cannon. Never forget to fire these shots because they can even plink away vehicles. They're strength 4, which means that toughness 5 vehicles are going to be wounded on a 5+, and they're -1 AP, so you can sneak a few wounds through. So always fire it if the targets present themselves and you're able to do so. Looking at the Doomsday Ark's abilities, it has living metal in common with just about every unit in the army. Command protocols, which means it can be affected by it. It explodes. When this model is destroyed, roll a d6. On a 6, any unit within 6 inches suffers d3 mortal wounds. That's standard on most vehicles. It's pretty hefty and important. It's a large vehicle, so you're going to catch a lot of people. Bear that in mind, that it can explode when you deploy it, because it's going to be generally near your units because it's an artillery piece. It's got the hovering rule, which means it's just clarifying that distances are measured to and from either this model's hull or base, whichever is the closest. So people can't be gamey with it by, turning it on its side or whatever and trying to stop you from being able to reach them, but yet they can just rotate and do the same to you. That's just, standard now on 40k vehicles. Now, here's the best ability, I think, of the entire unit, and that's Quantum Shielding. This, combined with living metal, means it's 14 wounds. It's going to be very survivable. Quantum Shielding gives it a 5+ invulnerable save. So straight away, anything worse than a -2 AP is not too scary for a Doomsday Ark compared to what it would be if it was hitting it without the Quantum Shielding. And also, quite crucially, each time an attack is made against the model, an unmodified wound roll of a 1 to 3 always fails. It's essentially transhuman physiology on a Doomsday Ark, which is brilliant. Remember when I mentioned it only has a toughness 6? Well, this more than compensates for it. A las cannon is going to wound a monolith or a land raider or an ironclad or anything else with toughness 8, a Lehman Russ for example, on a better score than a Doomsday Ark. That is how important Quantum Shielding is. So finally, looking at the faction keywords, it's Necrons and Dynasty, fairly standard. Keywords are Vehicle, Quantum Shielding, obviously, that's fairly important for a stratagem later on. Fly, which means if it does have to move, because of its movement at 12, you can get it where it needs to be, regardless of obscuring terrain. And Doomsday Ark. So moving on to potential character support, it's very limited because it doesn't have the core keyword, but what can help it is a Technomancer that can repair it with a Canoptic Cloak. D3 extra wounds, and that is not to be sniffed at because you are going to be repairing this unit if it's nearby and ensuring that it survives a little bit longer. Each turn that means you're going to get 1 for living metal and an extra D3 wounds. It's got 14 already, so it's easy to put it into a better bracket so the model can fire better if it gets heavily damaged over a couple of turns. Apart from this, there's no other characters that can support this unit, but Canoptic Spider can potentially repair it with a Fabricator Claw. So there are 2 ways now to repair this vehicle, and it's worth doing if anyone's nearby. It depends on how you're using your Canoptic Spiders, and it depends on your placement of a Technomancer, because bear in mind they might not necessarily be next to a Doomsday Ark, but a Doomsday Ark is an artillery piece, so it might have some warriors nearby that are getting fixed by the Technomancer. It might be worth doing in that regard. I recommend taking advantage of the repairs if you can. If not, don't worry too much, because it's an artillery piece. You're probably going to be having other units under pressure anyway, so the Doomsday Ark might be okay. The last unit in the book that Doomsday Ark can benefit from is a Triax Stalker. Its targeting relay means that a Necrons unit that fires at a unit that's already been hit by a Triax Stalker can reroll its hit rolls of a 1. This can be very useful, but again, it depends on what kind of crossover we're having. Is your Triax Stalker going to be firing at the same target as your big old Doomsday Cannon? If it is, then take advantage of it, but a lot of the time I think we'll find it's not going to be doing that. However, on that note, don't forget a Doomsday Ark does have 2 Gauss flare arrays, and that could be a lot of shots that could be re-rolling those hit rolls of a 1 that may have targeted an infantry squad, for example. So don't give up on the idea, but don't rely on it exclusively because it does require potentially wasting a Triax Stalker's shots on something that might only fire the D6 shots of the Doomsday Cannon 1 shot. so let's not be too risky with it. Usually a Triax Stalker is better off assisting a larger unit that can really benefit from lots of reroll ones to hit. Now moving on to stratagems, there are a few stratagems that do assist a Doomsday Ark, and the first one we'll look at is the Stellar Alignment Protocol. For just a single command point, until the start of your next command phase, your Doomsday Ark is considered to have its full wounds remaining for the purpose of determining which characteristics on its profile to use. This means that you have a better chance of hitting your target if you're quite a heavily damaged unit. Of course, we want our Doomsday Ark to do as much damage as possible and as often as possible, so this could be a crucial way of getting some last decent shots off with an otherwise neutered unit. I consider the Doomsday Ark to be a priority target for this, simply because it has such a big gun that you want to get the points out of. The very next stratagem we can take a look at, Disintegration Capacitators. It's normally going to be used on a large Necron Warriors blob, but if you haven't got a Necron Warriors blob to hand, I mean it might be the end of a game where things are getting down and desperate, Disintegration Capacitators means that a Necron's unit, which in this case would be the Doomsday Ark, can fire its Gauss Flare Array. An unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically wounds a target. That could be quite handy. That's quite a nice little thing. Similar to that, the Techno Oracular Targeting means that you can get one shot that's hit a target to automatically wound. It's not necessarily going to be 100% useful all the time with something like a Doomsday Cannon, but if you've only rolled rather low or you're desperate to get as many hits in as possible out of that D6, this could be quite useful. Both of these could be quite useful to increase its killing ability on the table, and it's definitely worth pairing them up and thinking about them in that regard with your Doomsday Ark. Remember, this is an expensive artillery piece. We want it to get as much damage out there as possible, so these are quite useful stratagems to help it out. Here's a big one that a lot of people are happy with, Quantum Deflection. For just one command point, your Necron's unit, Doomsday Ark, will go from a 5 up invulnerable save to a 4 up invulnerable save. Again, combined with the large number of wounds, its healing capacity from living metal, and also the fact you can heal it with other models, means that your artillery piece is actually a lot more likely to survive. Remember, Quantum Shielding is going to be making sure that it's got permanent transhuman physiology. Things are only going to wound it on a 4+. Yeah, you got a 4+ to wound, and then it's got 4 up invulnerable. It can be quite a difficult unit to take down because of this stratagem. Again, you want to be firing this expensive model as much as possible. I know it's gone down in points, but it's still a hefty amount of points investment. And as such, Quantum Deflection is definitely going to be a priority on this unit, and it's a priority target to use it on. Lastly, if you have a target that is hidden behind cover, or you really want to nuke it and it's hidden inside area terrain, Solar Pulse would mean that it does not receive the benefits of cover, and that could be quite useful, especially if it's units of, like, say, Gravis Armor, with their toughness 5, hiding away, holding an objective, and you want to nuke them with a Doomsday Cannon. This could be very useful on them. One command point, it's also something to consider. Out of all of the other dynasties, Talent for Annihilation isn't terrible with this. Mephrit do have a benefit when it comes to shooting. It means that the mass amount of Gauss Flare Array shots that it can do can inflict some mortal wounds. You're probably going to use it on a large warrior blob, but it's there as an option anyway, and it can help blink off extra wounds if you're using it on your Doomsday Ark. Saltec can assist the Doomsday Ark if something else has hit the target. For 2 command points, you can add +1 to the hit rolls. Again, you might not necessarily be firing at the same target as a Doomsday Ark, but if you can take advantage of it, do so. It's an as and when sort of situation, and you've got to use your best judgment there. Very last thing to talk about, just so I've covered it, would be the dynastic codes. Mephrit, again, are probably the best with Solar Fury. Each time a model is within half range, which basically means rapid fire range of those Gauss Flare Arrays, the armor penetration of their attacks gets improved by 1. That could be useful if someone gets close enough to it that you want to hammer it with rapid fire weapons, and your Gauss Flare Arrays counters that. Sarah Khan do have a Uncanny Artificer's ability, which means that each time a model with a code is selected to fight or shoot, you can reroll 1 wound roll when making that unit's attacks. That could be quite useful if you want to make sure you get as much damage through with your Doomsday Ark. You obviously want to get as much in as possible, and if you roll fairly low for the amount of shots you've got off and you've only managed to get, say, 1 hit, helps you get that wound off, which is nice. So that's really it for all the units that support a Doomsday Ark in the Necrons army. Overall, I'd say it's a good artillery piece, useful in just about any army. Any army can make use of it. If you've got a close combat melee oriented force, you could do with a heavy support. If you're trying to shoot people off the board, it's nice to have a Doomsday Ark. Whether you want one or not depends on your theme for the army. A Canoptech Stalker is obviously cheaper and has a very similar sort of weapon system, and it also gets boosted up by Technomancers potentially on its hit rolls. So it depends on what you want to do with your theme in your army, but a Doomsday Ark is fairly useful as an artillery platform, and 3 of those will mean that you don't have any friends, because people will not enjoy being blasted by 3 of those cannons a turn. That of course would be a large points investment, so it's not particularly broken if you did so. Anyway, that's it from me on the Doomsday Ark. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you all soon. Peace out.